Port Charlotte neighborhoods are still under feet of water today. You can see there are still cars, trees, branches covering the roads here. So the big story today is people know they're not going to have water, they're not going to have power, but they were hoping they wouldn't still be trapped. To show you what it means when a Category 4 hurricane hits, you have to visit the neighborhoods and talk to the families who lived through it. But we couldn't walk through feet of floodwater.
Oh, they had to have had water in there.
So Gary offered to help us out.
And we could make a right and go back out.
Gary and Mitzi live in this Northport neighborhood and rode out the storm in their house. They told us they were lucky the water only came up to their door, but so many of their neighbors weren't.
What I'm looking at across the street, that's mine. That's where we're supposed to be living.
Shannon Terry's home is still standing, but it flooded during the hurricane as she and her family sat inside.
Next thing I know, my daughter was like, "Mommy, here comes the water coming in." And it came through the front door. It came through the side door. I ran in the back bedroom. It was coming through the shower, just coming up through the shower, coming through the toilet, and then the smell. So then we're in there smelling that, and I said, this is going to keep rising.
Shannon knew, even in the middle of the storm, they couldn't stay. So she picked up her 11 and 4-year-old daughters and swam across her street.
As a mom, I didn't know what I was getting ready to swim across, what was going to be in that water with my daughters. I didn't even know if I was going to be able to make it across with them.
Her prayer answered.
Come on in, this is our setup in our home.
By neighbor Tricia.
And when we saw this family saying, begging, please, please, please let us in, with her baby on her back, our other daughter on the front, her husband carrying the dog.
The two women, once just neighbors,
they have become family.
But this family and the entire neighborhood can't start the process of cleaning up, filing insurance claims, trying to move on, because they can't get out of their flooded street.
I feel trapped, I feel stuck. We have no running water, so you can't take a good, nice, clean shower. Can't live like this.
Just a few blocks over, Brenda Lopez feels that weight.
There's so much going on. I don't have a minute. It feels like there's just overwhelm. It's hard.
Her family's cars won't start. They have no water or power.
I feel like I'm stranded, definitely. I wouldn't call it an island because it's not paradise today. It's far from paradise.
I've never seen anything like it. It was an inch going in. It wouldn't stop. It just kept going.
This entire neighborhood is hoping they aren't forgotten when the resources do arrive. But until then, they're helping each other.
We are alive. We're blessed.
In any way they can. In Northport, I'm Alexa Liacco reporting.
I believe hurt people hurt people. And that's what's happening in our communities.
From the comfort of our homes, we hear the numbers and read the headlines.
I feel like now we're living in a war zone. We're living in a war zone.
But it isn't until you sit down with mothers like Miss Lisa Dixon and Trina Singleton that you can truly feel the reality of what gun violence is doing to our families.
It just hurts so bad. It's a pain that I don't think that I'm ever going to be the same again. My kids is my life, and it's a driving force for me. And I feel like it's just gone now.
On May 9th, Miss Dixon's 31-year-old son, Brandon, was shot in the head 5 times while he was filling up at a gas station outside of Philadelphia. He was not in a gang, had no weapon of his own, and more than a month later, no suspects have been brought in front of police. Brandon is just one of the more than 20,000 people in the United States this year that the Gun Violence Archive estimates have died by suicide with a gun or by being shot by another person.
That screams to the level of gun violence that's going on in our country right now. Everybody, anybody can get a gun.
6 years ago, Trina experienced the same thing when her then 24-year-old son, Daryl, was shot and killed just outside of their home. CDC numbers show gun deaths in the United States have been steadily increasing over time. 2020, the year with the most recent available federal data, set a record when 45,222 people died from gunshots in the U.S. That number marked a 14% increase from the year before, a 25% increase from 5 years earlier, and a 43% increase from a decade prior. When you account for a rising population, the numbers are still high. On a per capita basis, there were 13.6 gun deaths in the United States for every 100,000 people in 2020, the highest rate since the mid-1990s, but still below the peak of 16.3 gun deaths per every 100,000 people back in 1974. On a large scale, it can be hard to comprehend those numbers since they're so big. In some cases and neighborhoods, so distant.
I miss my baby. I miss my son.
But when you consider every one of them has left loved ones like a mother, and in Brandon's case, a daughter behind.
That I keep this necklace so wherever I go, I take them with me.
The reality of what this is doing to thousands of families in our country every year is suddenly apparent.
I love them so much, I just don't want to say nothing about them.
A 2013 study by the National Institutes of Health found that for every percent that gun ownership in the United States rose between 1981 and 2010, the homicide rate also rose by 0.9%. In its report, the National Institutes of Health stated there's a robust correlation between higher levels of gun ownership and higher firearm homicide rates.
I love the way that he laughed and his smile. I love that.
For women like Trina and Miss Dixon, there is nothing that can predict the correlation between a mother and the love she has for her son, because that love is deep and, at least in the case of these two mothers, everlasting.
Losing a child, it's just something you can never come back from.
I'm Dan Grossman.
Just after sunrise in Tijuana, Mexico, the rust-colored border wall is like a snake separating two lands.
It's about 8 in the morning. We are on our way to the Esperanza migrant encampment at El Chaparral in Tijuana. El Chaparral is a point of entry.
For months, migrants have been traveling toward the United States with the hope of seeking a better life. Normally, people can present themselves at the U.S. point of entry to request asylum if they're fleeing from danger. Then they go through a process of having their case heard to see if it's legitimate. But current U.S. laws make it nearly impossible for migrants to seek asylum, leaving them stuck at the border.
So we're at Esperanza encampment, where we're told there's more than 2,000 people and about 8 new families arriving per day. You'll see here they actually ask for no cameras, and that's because a lot of these people are fleeing dangerous people, dangerous situation from their home country, and we really want to be respectful of that, so we're being sure to ask people before we show their face.
One woman willing to show her face is Jessie. We are not sharing her last name for her protection. She left Honduras with 2 of her kids because their lives were threatened by gang members.
Las maras entraron a nuestro apartamento y nos amarraron, pusieron a nuestros hijos en peligro y nos dieron 3 días para que saliéramos huyendo, o sea, que nos saliéramos de ahí de la colonia porque querían que les pagáramos 10,000 pesos.
Jessie says her kids have experienced a lot of trauma.
Mi niña, de hecho, tuvo que estar en psicología porque a ella le pusieron una pistola en la cabeza y estaba pequeña, solo tenía 6 años. La verdad fue bien terrible y por eso nosotros tuvimos que salir huyendo.
They've been at Esperanza encampment for nearly 40 days.
They're so close to the U.S. and yet still so far on their journey. So I can't describe it in any other way except heartbreaking.
Hola, buenos días.
¿Cómo andamos?
Dulce Garcia is the executive director of Border Angels,
Órale, gracias.
a nonprofit that advocates for human rights. Border Angels has been supporting the migrants with supplies.
There's still a need for food, just basic things, just food, tarps, blankets.
Walking around the camp, Dulce shows us how the migrants have formed their own community. Cooks, security guards,
Okay, ¿qué día es hoy?
and teachers for the kids. Throughout the day, different church groups and other humanitarian organizations drop off food or something to drink. But there's still a huge need for drinkable water.
Can they drink that? I mean, if there's no other water.
This is what they're using.
That's what they're drinking.
This is what they're cooking with. This is what they're drinking. This is the only supply of water that they have.
La mayoría en el campamento se han enfermado. La mayoría en el campamento tienen gripa, tienen tos. La mayoría de los niños andan todos así.
These people say they're here because they're desperate, fleeing political persecution, gang violence, domestic violence, and some have lost their homes in hurricanes.
The forces that are pushing people to leave their home countries have continued and have actually gotten worse in the pandemic.
Julia Neusner is a legal fellow with Human Rights First, an advocacy and action organization. She's been documenting the stories of migrants for a report on a U.S. code that is keeping these migrants at the border.
Because of Title 42, the border has been closed completely to asylum seekers since March 2020.
Julia says Title 42 is a rarely used U.S. law that gives government authority to exclude anybody who poses a public health risk to people in the United States. The Trump administration put it into place at the start of the pandemic. The Biden administration has yet to lift it.
One of the first questions this woman asked us last night was, how long is this going to take? How long do I have to wait here? And the answer is we don't know.
Dulce says part of the reason there are so many people at the border now is because many have been given misinformation that Title 42 has been lifted.
There are folks that prey on these people, and they tell them, if you give me money, you're going to have your case heard.
Now, thousands of people are stuck in limbo, hoping and praying for change.
They're holding on to hope, and that's why the camp has been renamed Esperanza, which means hope in Spanish. That's all they have. Some of them literally, that's all they have.
La meta es que abran la frontera, que tengan compasión de nosotros y nos dejen entrar, porque la verdad sí somos inmigrantes, pero no somos delincuentes. Queremos ir y trabajar a Estados Unidos.
In Tijuana, Mexico, with photojournalist Luis Ramirez, I'm Elizabeth Ruiz reporting.
Most towns, cities, and municipalities, big, medium, or small, all have law enforcement agencies meant to protect their city.
We just really need to know who vacated positions.
Most of the departments are filled with career officers, like Dallas Police Assistant Chief Katrina M. Shedd.
I got to 22 and I joined the police academy. I've been here ever since. 28 years later, I'm here in this position.
But what happens when veteran officers just like her leave? When police departments don't have enough employees to respond?
The officers that left were the officers with experience, the ones who understood how to mitigate crime, how to actually serve the community.
Having police officers does have a direct impact on public safety. First and foremost, it's the 911 calls.
Denver Police Chief Paul Pazin knows this struggle is far from unique to Denver.
Our response times are going through the roof. The high priority calls, the shootings, the stabbings, the violent crimes in progress, these are approaching 15-minute response times.
His firsthand experiences shed light on the reality of the future of law enforcement if things don't change.
That has some very severe consequences when we're talking about keeping the communities that we serve safe. It's making it very difficult to address these dramatic increases in violent crime, property crime, and traffic safety.
That's one path forward. The other involves doing things differently than they've always been done.
I think over many years, we've always thought that we did this in a vacuum on our own. It's just a police officer's job. It is a police officer's job. And we've come to learn and know that it is not.
Denver is one department that's paved the way for outside partnerships. Katrina and her team say it's time for every department to see the value of working with other organizations.
You may not have the number of sworn peace officers to respond to some of the calls that community needs us to respond to, but there are people within the community that we should be partnering with. Some calls don't necessarily need us at those scenes, and some calls actually escalate when we show up. There's a different type of feeling when a police officer shows up, just by the mere fact of what we're wearing.
Whether it's nonprofits or other city entities, that allows uniformed police officers to actually respond where it's necessary. This is all in addition to taking a new approach to recruiting.
The ability to hire this new generation has changed significantly for us. We often talk about their needs, and their needs focus on their family lives and the flexibility they can have.
But in order to change anything, they say we need to acknowledge what got us here in the first place: a pandemic, a lack of trust towards law enforcement, and high-profile killings that have put policing under scrutiny.
When we have this conversation, we have to acknowledge the murder of George Floyd and law enforcement's role in creating many of these challenges.
Both say we have two options: continue forward with understaffed departments and an inability to be present at every incident while crime rates continue to rise, or change.
This is making an already difficult job nearly impossible when you have fewer police officers there and available to address these issues. This divide has to get fixed.
I'm Jesse Cohen reporting.
The town of Nogales, Arizona usually hosts visitors from Mexico by the thousands every day.
We're not at the level that we were pre-pandemic as far as the crossing. It was a drastic decrease in the volume of traffic that was entering through the ports of entry, but we expect that to slowly be climbing.
During the pandemic, only essential travelers or legal residents were allowed into the U.S. In the past few months, both essential and non-essential travelers from Mexico, including tourists, are now allowed in with proof of vaccination.
Since these were put in place, it has delayed, the wait times crossing the border.
Once quiet and closed off in 2020, people are coming back through the entry points. Businesses like La Familia are welcoming people back with open arms.
De hecho, ya están bajando las ventas, pero estamos estables. Y con la pandemia, la verdad, sí afectó a muchas personas, muchos negocios.
They have significantly less staff now than pre-pandemic, but have fared better than other businesses on this once busy street, littered with closed doors and signs.
Bastantes tiendas cerraron y muchas ya no volvieron a abrir, ya quebraron por total.
The U.S. southern ports of entry saw 130.8 million passenger vehicles come into the U.S. in fiscal year 2019. In 2021, that number was down to 88.3 million. In the same years, pedestrian crossings fell from 48.7 million to 26 million.
So if these people cross and they even buy a bottle of water for $1, that's just a huge impact.
Edith Serrano with U.S. Customs and Border Protection says the economic impact goes beyond the border towns.
It doesn't just necessarily stay here in our southern border, it expands throughout the United States.
For David's Western Wear, the lack of foot traffic is just one of many issues they face.
It won't get back to where it was, and that's not just COVID. That's a lot of things. Border business has been kind of tricky anyways for the past few years.
David Moore says Mexican nationals who once spent their money on the U.S. side instead spent their money in Mexico when they couldn't cross.
People have been coming back in, but it's slow going because a lot of people's visas ran out. So they're trying to get appointments to revalidate them, but they can't. The appointments are a year, 2 years out sometimes.
With open borders and safety measures in place, customers are trickling back. Businesses are staying open however they can, but many owners already see change coming.
Aquí es un pueblo y no hay muchas partes donde trabajar y ha afectado demasiado y si sigue así van a seguir quebrando y pues toda la gente va a necesitar trabajo y van a tener que emigrar a otras partes.
The dynamic of business is changing everywhere. Nogales' problems have been problems since before COVID, but COVID just put the squeeze on us pretty hard.
I'm Chloe Nordquist reporting.